Order. Welcome to the Public Accounts Committee on Thursday the 5th of March 2026. With high expenditure, complex procurement and a workforce split between the armed forces and the civil service, the Ministry of Defence faces particular challenges against a significant threat of economic crime and misconduct. As the government moves to fulfil its commitment to increase defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by 2027, exposure to these threats is only set to grow. Although the MOD receives hundreds of allegations of suspected fraud or economic crime each year, relatively few result in detection, disruption and recovery. The MOD reports that its potential exposure to fraud can reach up to £1.5 billion per year, mostly from procurement. However, this is only a broad estimate. While the MOD recovered more than it spent on counter-fraud work in 24/5, over the last 4 years, it's recouped on average just 48p for every pound spent, substantially below the government's expectation of £3 for every pound spent. So, today's session will be an opportunity to challenge the MOD on how it maintains its central view of counter-fraud activity, consider plans to improve the counter-fraud culture and leadership, and explore how MOD can achieve better outcomes from its counter-fraud work. So we're very pleased to have a senior team from the MOD, in particular a warm welcome to you, Jeremy, on your promotion to be Permanent Secretary. I'm hoping you're finding you're still happy that the promotion with the challenges that you have. But anyway, warm welcome. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Jeremy Pocklington. I'm the Permanent Secretary at the Ministry of Defence. I was formerly Permanent Secretary at Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and before that, Permanent Secretary at the Department for Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government.
Thank you. Anine, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning. I'm Anine Blackmore, Director General of Finance at the MOD.
Thank you. And Jim Carter, please?
Morning. So I'm Jim Carter. I'm Director General Commercial and Industry in the Ministry of Defence.
Very good. And finally, by no means least, but you, Simon, sir, please.
Good morning. My name is Simon Dobinson and I'm the Acting Chief Constable of the Ministry of Defence Police.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, all of you, for coming. I know you're busy people. So we will start, please, with Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. Just to reiterate a couple of points that the Chair highlighted in his opening comments that I wanted to ask you about. I mean, clearly the Ministry of Defence is responsible for huge-scale contracts, billions of pounds of public money, and clearly counter-fraud initiatives couldn't be more important. The Treasury, as the Chair mentioned, expects savings of £3 for every £1 that is spent on counter-fraud measures. So could you explain, Jeremy, why the MOD has saved only 48p in every pound over the last 4 years?
Can I start by welcoming the report, if I may, and the hearing today? Everyone on the panel, but myself as accounting officer, takes safeguarding taxpayers' money incredibly seriously, given the scale of the spend and the work of the Ministry of Defence. Our job is to maximise the impact of every pound we receive so that that can be spent on improving the warfighting capability of our military. That requires a whole set of robust financial and commercial controls, which are absolutely part of the picture that we are talking about today. But we, of course, also need very specific controls in place around fraud and error and economic crime. What I would say is the department is making good progress, but the report actually reflects a lot of work that we already had underway and that we want to go further on in the department to strengthen our controls in this place. In particular, on the specific issue you have raised on the spend and the return on investment, we have already seen a significant upward trend. The most recent data was for £1.34 returned on every £1 spend, and that reflected increased use of new tools and techniques, better analytics as well, and we think we are on track to achieve the Public Sector Fraud Authority target of 3 to 1 by 2028, if not sooner. Why is the numbers low? We do think there's more that are lower in the past. We do think there's more that we need to do to record the benefits and record the impact of our recovery, which may have affected some of the data. That reflects partly, as you referred to in your opening statement, the complexity of the operating environment, but we are under no way complacent and recognise there is more that we need to do to capture the benefits of this and to make sure we are wholly focused on this important issue.
Can I just come back to you on the assessment that you made of good progress? Because that isn't the reflection that I took from this report. So it'd be really helpful to understand where you see that good progress being made, and also how you are confident about your trajectory going forward. Because from what I understand, the reason that the 48p in the pound has a slight improvement is a one-off recovery, as opposed to a trajectory in the pattern of recovery. So could you just explain that discrepancy and where you see the trajectory improving going forward? Because this report doesn't indicate that to me.
The report does suggest elements of the progress that we have made, and I'm confident that I've seen in my first few months of the department there is evidence of that. That is, and we will talk in more detail about that during this hearing, it reflects already there is closer joint working between the different elements of the department and the Ministry of Defence Police, represented by Simon here today, but also the service police forces in the service justice system. We've already made progress on that. An example would be the police embed in our defence fraud team as well, improving our focus, making sure there is better alignment between the department and the police. We're strengthening our systems of accountability in the department and our capability as well. And we are focusing more on analytics and how that can help us with recovery, investing in new tools and techniques that enable us to leverage technology to really enable us to, I'd summarise it as identify irregularities in the system that need to be explored further by our fraud experts. Our policy is very clear. We have a zero tolerance policy on fraud. All allegations are investigated, but we do need to go further, and that is set out in the report. My team, my department, is refreshing the counter-fraud strategy. Again, some of the steps are already being set out there, and we will have an implementation plan around that. It's a 3-year strategy. That 3 years is coming to an end. So now is the time to be refreshing our counter-fraud strategy. That is going to include, for example, work on getting a better estimate of fraud exposure. You've already alluded to the quite theoretical estimate in the report. We will have clearer objectives as part of a very important, quite fundamental set of reforms of the department and the defence reform. We will clarify accountabilities. We will have new oversight of risk registers. We are improving, consolidating our approach to the confidential hotline and the case management system and how our teams work together in order to go after this issue.
Okay, so are you confident that by next year we're going to see a significant increase on that 48p in the pound recovery?
I think we have already seen an increase on that 48p in a pound recovery. But I recognise...
Sorry, I think we need to be clear that the £1.34 appears to be a one-off situation, because there was a one-off recovery that recouped commercial leakage that brought about a one-off recovery. But are you confident overall, taking that aside, that we're going to see an increase on the 48p in the pound, which is already well below the £3 in the pound?
I am confident that our approach we will see improvements, particularly through greater analytics. The £1.30, I recognise it's not you want to see more evidence of the trend. Yeah. It is a real fact, though.
No, I absolutely acknowledge it's a real fact. It's noted very clearly in the report, but it doesn't necessarily solve the underlying challenges of how we improve this. And with respect, it doesn't feel like there's an acknowledgement of the scale of the challenge, which is my impression on reading this report. But I'm happy to get into a bit more of the detail.
I think what we should do is get into the detail of the counter-fraud strategy that we are working on and the many steps that we are taking. This is all, though, part of a wider system of financial controls and commercial controls in the department, because the best we need a balanced approach, looking at prevention, at detection and recovery. But prevention is incredibly important, and that means also looking at the wider context of the department and the controls that we have in place. We do spend very large amounts of money. There are different definitions, but roughly 40 billion on procurement. That's the number in the report. A bit under half of that, again, it depends on exactly how you count it, is through the sort of single source contracting regulations. They are very, very specific and tight regulations that reflect the fact in the Ministry of Defence it's not always possible to compete our contracts. And that gives the department particular access in open book arrangements, benchmarking arrangements to identify what is happening with our suppliers. None of this is to take away from the importance of this issue, the serious risk it is in a department like MOD, as it is in many government departments, but we have a particular reason to be focused on it, and the recognition that we need to continue our efforts and to do more.
Okay, thank you. This is probably a question for you, Jim, on, what are you doing to make sure that your commercial teams are increasing those counter-fraud savings and that we do see an improvement on that 48p in the pound that is currently the trajectory?
It's probably helpful context for the committee if I just quickly set out, because Jeremy referenced it, the commercial controls framework, and then I'll answer your specific question. But there are controls throughout the contract life cycle to consider and prevent and make sure we minimise fraud, including by embedding kind of rigorous prevention and enforcement measures. At the top level, these joint services publications, which define our zero tolerance stance. And then there's specific commercial policy that underpins that, related to bid rigging and collusion, and also through the Procurement Reform Act 2023, giving us exclusions and debarment policy. So where suppliers who are guilty of fraud, we can debar. Underneath that, we have mandatory contract clauses and supplier ethics oversight to minimise fraud. And working very closely with ANIN, we have strict segmentation of duties following the government's functional standards. And then just very quickly, here's sort of post-award, our contract management and supplier relationship management processes mitigate frauds. And then into the supply chain, we have anti-counterfeit and IPR protections in our supply chains. So I'm trying to describe a sort of nested set of controls here that particularly focus on preventing fraud.
The question is, are they working? Make
sure we protect public money. I think the specific point that Jeremy made around that recovery, I also have confidence, because the technology that we use to identify and recover, but we are deploying more widely. So we applied it to a particular kind of business unit, and we can use it to apply more widely. And I'd be happy to talk to the committee about the opportunities we see ahead, actually, in terms of some of those digital tools and how they can reduce fraud.
So, and are you confident that you have full sight, sufficient sight on what's happening throughout that chain of process in order to minimise the fraud risks? I appreciate you've outlined what the policies are, but what is the reality on the ground? Because the indications are that there isn't sufficient oversight. So how are you making sure that there is?
So I think, the opportunities to improve that side. So I totally agree with Jeremy that we are not complacent. So I think we have good controls. And whether that's in our single source environment, and I can talk more about that, or in our competitive environment, our processes follow really good practice in terms of segregation of duties, independent sort of moderation of our approach, and an assurance, scrutiny and approval process that makes sure there's sort of independence. I think the opportunity we have, though, through analytics is to use technology to spot some of those flags and to spot some of those irregularities so that we sort of hone in and focus where those are occurring.
So could you just explain, because in the last 4 years, as I gave the figure, it's 48p in every pound. Can you explain what's changing in order to improve that?
Well, I think it's through use of some of those technologies so that we both have the preventative frameworks that I've described, but we can detect irregularities more. And we are engaging in implementing new tools for our commercial and finance colleagues through corporate services modernisation, and we're embedding in our processes those fraud prevention sort of flags, and at every stage of the procurement cycle, so that we kind of capture those.
Can I just come in here, because it's quite important to help. There's a risk of a bit of confusion, I think, during this hearing. I think it's important we just sort of unpack the different issues here. I think early on in the hearing, there are specific teams and measures that we have in place on the very specific issue of fraud, led by the fraud defence team, which is a team of about 24 people, I think, in the core Department of State bit of the Ministry of Defence, and there are about 50 or so, I think, experts in total in the wider department. Specific activities, specific tools and techniques that they are using, but they are embedded and part of a much bigger system of financial and commercial controls. The PSFA, Public Sector Fraud Authority Ratio, doesn't measure these wider finance and commercial controls in all the detail as well. We need to look at the whole picture in order to get a proper assessment of the success and the controls that the department is in place, again recognising that we need to do more. So I'll give you a specific example if I can. We've alluded to, and Jim talked about this, the sort of single source controls. A big part of that, and we have absolutely class-leading cost assurance and analysis service, which is part of that system. The billions of pounds of spend that go through single source are examined in detail to ensure that suppliers' costs are genuine. And where necessary, those costs are disallowed, or even in some cases payments are recovered. That's when suppliers are incorrectly allocating overheads, their estimates are not supported, their labour rates are not actually consistent with the market. And last year, this team disallowed £400 million of potential costs the department would have incurred. They are an evidence of robust controls the department has in place to protect the taxpayer. They are not captured in that 48p return that you've alluded to there, because that's a very specific subset of this. We need to do more on that. The key there will be analytics is the thing that will make a difference to increase the return on investment in that particular bit of activity. But what I'm encouraging the committee to do is, yes, look at that, but also see this as part of a broader picture.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the fraud defence team and its work, and I suspect these questions are for you, Anine, the 130 bespoke risk registers that you operate to, some have severe and critical activity risks, but they've not been updated or acted on, some of them for up to 5 years, it says here. Do you have a sense of how well those existing controls are operating, and what are you doing to ensure that they are operating at their maximum effectiveness?
Thank you. You're absolutely right to note that we have an established regime of how we have in place risk registers throughout the organisation. As the Chair noted in his opening remarks, we do have a large-scale complex organisation which will require risk registers at each level so that we are driving our best understanding. Let me share a little bit about how we are improving the registers and then how we are going to be using them really to drive the focus of where we want to ensure that we have resources and investment going forward. As Jeremy alludes to, that will be part of how we improve our return on investment and drive value for the taxpayer. So, as you'll be aware, Defence Reform has restructured the department. We will be taking this opportunity to review how we are structuring our risk registers to match the broader governance in the department. We have an enterprise risk register framework that we have developed recently, and that will be rolled out this year so that from the board downwards, we will be nestling our risk registers in a consistent framework. The Forward Defence team is now working with each of the areas, the new areas, to ensure that they have a risk register at the area level. And then below that, we will be maturing the well-established risk registers that exist already in our frontline commands and enabling organisations. And then below that, again, focusing on our programme risk registers. As the NAO report highlighted, we were really pleased that we have ensured that all 22 of the major programmes where we asked to do an initial forward assessment were completed to the relevant standard. Absolutely not stopping there, though. And we are, as we speak, rolling out the public sector forward authorities tool. It's an accelerator tool which will allow us to produce risk registers more quickly on a data consistent standard so we can roll that out more broadly. So that ensures that we've got the right structure in place that nestles into a consistent framework and we can drive activity and focus from the board downwards. As you rightly allude to, though, the challenge then is making sure that we are actively using them and that we are using them to ensure that we are focusing our resources, both people and investment in new tooling, in the places where we think it will make the most difference. What we will be doing to support that, and we'll be setting this out in our counter-forward strategy refresh that Jeremy alluded to, is setting out how we're expecting the risk registers to be used. We will be building a programme of work on the back of that to say where should we invest, and actually the commercial leakage tool is a good example of some of that early intervention where we are proactively saying this is where our risk sits. It's not where we get the majority of the fraud allegations, but we know this is where our material risk sits, so how can we get after that more proactively? And we're also, I think, really importantly, strengthening the functional oversight, and that will be through my role as DG Finance, and that strengthening will allow us to be using the risk registers in a more focused way, holding the organisation to account for their activities.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for those opening questions. Excellent questions, Catherine. Thank you. Permanent Secretary, I just want to pick, for a point of clarification, pick up on one important thing you said to Catherine, and this is for your refreshed plan. Your next financial year are going to get the government's pledge to go to 2.5% of GDP, so you're going to get another 11 billion odd next financial year. So this refreshed plan, I would have thought, is absolutely urgent because clearly the potential for increase forward with that increased amount of budget you're going to get must be going up considerably. So when will the refreshed plan be available? Will you publish it in full? In order not to try and guide you on the answer to that, some departments are a little bit shy about publishing everything in full on fraud because you don't want to give the fraudsters too much information.
Exactly, an important point that is in my mind. So we already. First thing I want to say is we already have a plan that we're working on improving it because we have a plan that we have a 3-yearly process. So this is part of our 3-yearly process, which is why we welcome the reports to actually come at just the right time. Actually, as we're finalising our plan, we're working to complete the new plan by September. And perhaps I can write to the committee with a summary of the plan. Would that be an appropriate method. This is an internal management document. I would not want to publish all elements
No, I
of
absolutely
it.
understand that for the reasons I've said.
This is a very complex system
Yes.
I oversee here, but I'd be very happy to write to the committee with a summary
We don't
of the
want
plan.
to be the cause of giving the fraudsters any information they shouldn't have. Anine, just one very quick question for me, and then I'm going to go on to Sarah Heath Green. We've had evidence from Accountancy Age which tell us that between 2022 and 2025, you blocked 8,918 invoices totaling 211 billion odd. Just over half, 563, were later corrected and resubmitted successfully by suppliers. But the remaining 3,855 were permanently rejected. Now that presumably is a significant amount of money. What happened to those invoices and suppliers? If they didn't resubmit the invoices, what happened to those invoices you blocked?
So I'm not sure of the specifics of what underpinned the information you're sharing, and I would have to go away and look at the specifics of that report. I mean, what I would say, and it's a slight supposition on my part, but I think links to the example that Jeremy gave, as part of our financial and control, sort of financial and commercial control framework, we have teams that look at invoices as they come in and confirm against the contract whether we would see them as allowable or disallowable expenditure. That is part of our normal activity. It is a very complex regime, and where we see disallowances, we engage with the supplier to understand whether there is a mistake, a misunderstanding, and a range of routes in response to that.
Would you let us have a note on that? I mean, if you haven't seen the evidence from Accountancy Age, I apologise, but we'll supply that. And then if you could let us have a note on it. Could you also let us have a note? I mean, the Permanent Secretary did refer to this. Advanced analytics, AI and so on, seems to be an absolutely prime case for this in scanning these invoices. If you could let us have a note on that too, how this is going to help you actually detect which invoices are correct and which are not. I mean, it's a fairly simple accounting function, I would have thought.
Absolutely, I think Jim wants to come in.
Can I come in just very quickly on that one? So we are embedding in our new tooling a continuous duplicate invoice check. So in the past we've applied analytics sort of retrospectively to this, but this will be happening through the process, which will avoid that in future.
Yeah, we need to.
Retrospective is no good if you paid out the money.
Indeed, the trick is moving away from just relying on people reporting concerns, important though that is, and to be very much welcomed, and sampling through first and second lines of defence in the department. The thing that analytics enables us to do is, in time, review the whole picture as it's happening to spot those irregularities. That's the prize that over time we need to get to, and all organisations will need to. It's wider than just defence.
Thank you very much. Sarah Green, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think my question is for Anine and Simon. The Permanent Secretary, in his answer to Catherine, said the department has a zero tolerance approach to fraud and economic crime. So I'm curious to understand why so few investigations result in criminal action or service justice action, or indeed monies recovered.
Shall I start? Thank you for the question. So the department's zero tolerance to fraud is an absolutely critical part of our culture and stance. And what that means for the department is that we investigate all allegations through the confidential hotline. Many of those allegations don't come with sufficient evidence, and we will follow up where we can to try and build that evidence so that we can take forward an investigation. But we investigate all allegations that come through, and they cover a very wide range of potential outcomes. And I think that reflects the complex environment that exists in the MOD. So we investigate all allegations. what we find, and the report shows, is where we can investigate those allegations, 30% of them result in a finding, both a formal and informal finding. They may be criminal, and Simon can talk a little bit about that. They may be informal response on the civilian side. They also, I think, helpful for the committee to be aware that we pick up the lessons learned and look for control weaknesses. So we have that feedback loop back to our control environment. But we do have findings in 30% of the cases that we are able to investigate.
Thank you. So I think just some context first of all. Ministry of Defence Police has an operational footprint in relation to how we provide protective security and physical security across the MOD estate at certain locations. Those requirements are laid out to us by the Directorate of Security and Resilience around a number of sites that require high-end specialist armed policing capability. But we also maintain a relatively small investigative capability for investigating specific offences that present a risk to the safety and security of the homeland. Those offences are not wholesale in the same way as all Home Office forces would investigate. They are specific to economic crime, such as corruption, bribery. They also include those types of offences that that are a risk around theft of or damage to the estate. We have the full-time equivalent of about 7 staff that provide a dedicated investigative capability to investigate economic crime at any one time. The majority of referrals to the Crime Command investigative capability come through the hotline. And that's why we have the embed involved in that. Because what the embed is able to do is to assist with that triaging process to ensure that the right types of offences are being reported to and then prioritised by that small team of 7 people. Alongside that, we have certain capabilities that are specific to the Ministry of Defence Police, such as being able to seek confiscation orders under the Proceeds of Crime Act that neither the service police have nor fraud defence staff and colleagues. And that's one of our USPs around the ability to be able to actually draw down on that. Our recoveries for last year was just over £850,000, with predictions that we would seek to improve that as we start to see transformation through improved joint working. Our detection rate for last year was 38%, up from a detection rate of 31% the previous year, so there's some improvement there. If we look around the timeliness of our investigations, on average about just over a year it takes to investigate, and the City of London investigative policy suggests nationally an investigation should last no longer than about 2 years, so our timeliness is quite good. So that's some context. Specific to your point around the detection rate, we are governed by the National Crime Recording Standards and the Scottish Crime Recording Standards. So where an offence is reported to us, we have to record it in line with that. And then we will then seek to carry out a proportionate investigation in lines with all investigative opportunities. Many of those things will be affected, though, by things such as whether or not the type of offence that's been reported to us in a timely enough way provides us the opportunity still to secure and preserve evidence. But also, then, we are subject to the Crown Prosecution Service and the criminal justice system, unlike colleagues within the service police who work to the the service justice system. So, in summary, we try to get upstream by having the embed. So we're talking the same language the fraud defence are around how things are prioritised and what are referred to us. We then have to make sure we record appropriately. We then have to make sure we carry out proportionate and thorough investigation, and then we provide that as a charging, standards to charging to CPS. And the outcomes at the moment indicate around a 38% detection rate for those offences that we are investigating.
What could change, or what would you request could change to help you achieve more criminal outcomes? Like you've mentioned there are 7 dedicated staff. Like, is that an area you would request more investment in? The Permanent Secretary mentioned a great deal about technology earlier, but you were talking very specifically about 7 team members. Is there something to do with team collaboration and cooperation and leadership that would help with that?
So it's a very timely question, because some of the work that's been going on in the background now for quite a while as part of defence reform is how we can better align our capabilities across fraud defence, across civilian policing, across single service policing. The governance has been now put in place, so there is a Defence Police Board that sits, chaired by a general, and the main purpose behind that is to get oversight of the risks that are affecting policing across defence. And also to see what the output, the totality of output is as well. So we're talking the same language.
Why am I asking how new that is? Is it already in place?
It's already in place.
How long has it been in place?
It's been in place, I would say, with effect for about 6 months, 6 to 8 months. Supporting that, there's the Defence Police Chiefs Council. So each of the Provost Marshals, myself or the Deputy, alongside Fraud Defence, sit on that, which is where we come together to, again, try and look at where we can cohere where we possibly can. Part of the work that's been commissioned is developing a concept of or a course of action around how we can move to a more regular way of working through, whether it be collaborative, whether it be co-location. But there are some hurdles to overcome, and there are some constraints, such as how we share information, access to police systems and the integrity of that have to be maintained. The operational independence of civilian policing has to be maintained so we don't have perverse outcomes. But we are also trying to work to a clearer path around the timeliness of those investigations. The quicker we can be referred to, a crime can be referred to us or a matter can be referred to us, we can make that assessment of whether it's a crime and we can pursue it. I think one of the key points linked to that is recognising that as an entity, we are limited in the resources that we have. We have a very significant challenge around recruitment, and that's not something that's just affecting us within the Ministry of Defence Police, that's something affecting all Home Office policing as well. I'm glad to say that the decisions recently been made around ensuring there is a crime command capability to support defence, because it's a commissioned service, means that we will now be able to really double down on our recruitment requirements and recruit the best that we can to provide the outcomes we need.
Give me the operational independence bit. With a little bit of knowledge at the moment, it seems from this report that I could fall through the cracks and get away with something which is costing the taxpayers a lot of money. Are you confident that that isn't the case going forward?
So I'm confident that from my perspective, if we are referred a matter through the hotline, or, as we are also at the moment, identifying opportunities through open source research, matters that are referred to us through security incident reporting forms that we pick up on, that we are identifying opportunities for investigations. What we need to do is we need to refer more of this back into fraud defence so we can get a really clear assessment of all offences.
What's stopping that from happening at the moment?
So historically there have been challenges in relation to the way people have worked, and I think that's been very much driven by a lack of understanding around what can be shared and how it can be shared. That is very much historical now, and we are in a very different place with a real ambition to move forwards as a single course of action.
Thank you. Sorry, Annie, I cut across you. You were trying to say something.
Well, what I was going to do, the conversation sort of focused on the criminal route, and I just wanted to provide reassurance to the committee that our programme of work is very much focused on ensuring that we've got robust investigations throughout the organisation. We are very live to the fact that 60% of allegations end up being investigated by local areas, so not through our police partners. And so our approach is very focused on how we ensure that we have the right support and the right skills to support those local area investigations, both to ensure that we've got focal points in every area that have been accredited, the support from Counterfraud and from HR colleagues, but also the assurance that we have in place. And I think the NAO was really, the report was really helpful in highlighting some further improvements that we could make in this space, particularly around sampling that we will be taking forward. And so I wanted to reassure the committee that both our structure and our future plans are very much focused on how we ensure that robust investigation across the enterprise.
How many regional teams are there, sorry? You mentioned regional teams. How many regional teams are there? You said that you didn't by area.
There aren't set regional teams. The structure that we operate in is ensuring that the investigation can be carried out in the relevant organisation where it's felt that it's not going to go down the criminal route. So that will be carried out
lower level,
lower down in the organisation.
So the Ministry of Defence is now divided into 4 areas. That's the phrase we will use. The Department of State, which is the sort of the relatively small bit at the centre, it's the military strategic headquarters, the military, but also where about half the civil servants work as well. The National Armaments Director Group, which Jim is, and where a lot of the procurement takes place, and the nuclear enterprise as well, specific procurement around nuclear deterrent.
Okay. I would appeal for shorter questions and particularly shorter answers, because we've only begun to touch the subject at the moment. We've had 3/4 of an hour or so. So Rupert Lowe, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't quite know where to start. When I look at this report, I don't think this tells you all of the leakage that's taking place. And when I look at the taxes that are being levied on farmers and small businesses that are forcing them to sell their farms and their businesses, and I look at this leakage, I mean, you talk about 1.5 billion here, I don't actually think you're probably capturing all of the leakage that's going on. So I think my question is to you, Jeremy. When I read in the NAA report, which I thought was excellent, and by the way, there is no room for complacency, as you said. I'm very glad to hear you're not complacent, because if I was on the end of a report like this, I'd certainly not be complacent. So when I read that the culture, let's look at the culture, a lack of trust between counter-fraud and police teams, and noted unclear lines of reporting, duplication and missed investigative opportunities. I then read about siloed working between different teams, inefficiencies and duplication, and relatively few criminal investigations which tend not to be complex or serious. I then go on and I read something that really concerns me. We also found inconsistency in how seriously different parts of the MOD considered and responded to potential misconduct or fraud. Officials and police also told us that some areas of the MOD do not consider fraud to be a major risk and can be reluctant to engage. So I look at this, and I run lots of contracting business, we do lots of procurement, and I just don't think there's any joined up thinking evident here at all. And you're going to be spending a lot more than you're currently spending. Your whatever it is, 46 billion, is likely to go up to 75 billion. So if these endemic sort of cultural and structural inefficiencies continue, there's going to be more leakage, and therefore more taxes are going to be required on the private sector. So I think this is really very concerning. And I'd like to know, Jeremy, really, how are you going to improve this? And are you going to give it the seriousness that it requires?
I said at the outset of this hearing, Mr. Lowe, that I take this seriously. There's absolutely no room for complacency. It's the heart of my job, the job of everyone on this panel, but the department as well, to make sure that we are maximising the value we get from every pound of taxpayers' spend. That requires the controls in place. It requires skills, it requires capability, but it does also require the right culture as well that you alluded to. I think some of the issues in the report, having spent a lot of time preparing for today, some of the issues sort of highlighted in the report reflect the complexity of the environment in which we are operating in the MOD. It is a very large, complex organisation. We have the military workforce, the civilian workforce. We have multiple different police forces that we are working with. But I want to assure you that I and the other senior leaders are placing great importance on the right culture of trust and collaboration. We have fresh leadership in the department, in the fraud defence team, and it's fantastic that we have Simon here today. And we have, in particular, I think, a new integrated investigative model that is really requiring all the different parties to come together, to work together collaboratively.
Can I just interrupt you because you're talking generalities here? So let's go through the report. Theft of assets. Around 2/3 of these reports related to lost assets, with theft making up only 13%. Can you define lost assets? Question. Personnel and management issues and information exploitation. Failure to follow gifts and hospitality rules, abuse of flexible working time, and deceit and misrepresentation of financial advantage. Unlawfully obtaining and disclosing official documentation. I mean, look, this is serious stuff. So please don't talk generalities. What are you practically going to do to sort this out?
There is no disagreement.
These aren't generalities. These are actual events.
There is no disagreement between us on the seriousness and the importance of the issue. I will talk specifically about assets, and then I will talk about the wider strategy to deal with fraud, because there is actually a whole set of different issues that you are raising there. Control of assets is very important in a department like the Ministry.
What is something lost? When you say lost assets, most of them are apparently lost. What does that mean? Does anyone get punished for losing an asset? In my business, if somebody loses an asset, if there's no justification for losing it, they have to pay for it.
We record and follow up all lost assets. The process is underpinned by our security control framework. A majority of our lost assets relate to phones or laptops, and as you can imagine, we want to ensure that we track those carefully. The response will, as you rightly note, depend on the justification given. We will absolutely be alive to any patterns if we think they are occurring, but the majority are cases of misplacement of phones and laptops, but we will record the reason and where it happens.
You can have as many risk registers, as many processes, as many sort of analytical tools. In the end, you've got to send people to prison for being dishonest, and that's what you would do. I know we've got issues with the courts who don't punish people properly, but in the end, people have got to fear that when they break the law, when they're deceitful, when they steal, they go to prison. So I'm just going to go on and ask you a few more things. Because you talked about prescriptive or nominated procurement. You mentioned that. So in my businesses, we have an annual review or 6-month review of where all the spend goes. Biggest supplier first. We then review those. We then have a discussion with those suppliers. We ask them for rebates. We actually discuss proactively with them how we can reduce the cost to our business. Because in the private sector, we're being loaded with taxes, with national insurances, with all sorts of stuff that is leaking out the side through the MOD procurement, clearly. So do you have those meetings? When people nominate suppliers, I'm immediately suspicious. Why are you nominating a supplier? Is there some further dishonesty going on? Because you often don't need to necessarily, unless there's a really good reason, you don't need to nominate. So look, there's loads of stuff that we need to be doing here.
Should we just let them answer a little bit and then you can come back?
Yeah, but we don't want to talk generalities, Geoffrey. We want
I'll just give one specific and then hand over to Jim to talk about oversight of suppliers. One specific is the department is now using the new powers available to us in the Procurement Act 2023 to require suppliers to disclose conflicts of interest that they have a new duty on, to ensure that we are bearing down on exactly those issues that you have raised. And just another thing I'll just say in the hand of Jim is, obviously, preparing for the hearing, I've spent a lot of time with the teams and our lawyers asking about what's actually happening in the department to try and get that understanding. I am aware of cases where our commercial lawyers have found issues and have said, hang on, we think this might pass the criminal threshold, where the intent is such that it might pass the criminal threshold, and either reported the case to the police or criminal counsel to take that matter further, saying there's not more that we need to do in the department, but this is something we take very seriously. Mr. Lowe specifically asked about how we oversee and manage our relationship with suppliers. That's Jim's role, so I'll hand over to Jim.
Briefly, please, Jim.
So, I mean, we absolutely do robustly manage the performance of our suppliers to deliver to schedule, cost and time. We also, though, specifically pick up on this point around how they are managing fraud through reviews with them. So we check about their whistleblowing frameworks, their ethics, their supply chain risks, their modern slavery compliance, and we make sure, because your question was more broadly around culture, and obviously we have mandatory fraud and corruption training for kind of commercial staff, but we also set expectations on our supply chain that they also conduct that training.
But on your whistleblowing line, for instance, I mean, if you run a whistleblowing line, you've got to make it effective. You had 1,037 cases, of which I think 363 ended up being properly investigated by the police. If you don't have a properly functioning whistleblowing line, people won't whistleblow. But anyway, I think I've covered that off. But I've got one last question because I know we're under time pressure. So when the MOD, in their conclusion, says the MOD has an opportunity to save money through better coordination and management of its counter-fraud and economic crime activity. So Jeremy, in order to make that happen, you've got to not only change the culture, you've got to pull together all the departments so there is a common approach to how you're going to save the taxpayer money. The poor taxpayer who is being abused here, we need to make sure they're looked after. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to pull this together? And how are you going to stop it being siloed?
That is at the heart of our revised counter-fraud strategy that we are working on, taking into account our internal work and the findings of the report. In an organisation as large and complex as the MOD, that requires a systemic approach across the system for us to operate at multiple different levels. First of all, it requires us to continue to refine our estimate. That's important in its own right, but it also means it gives us a clue where should we go after. Where should we work harder? Because we think there might be fraud or other things that are creating risk here. That's about leadership. We've talked about that. It's about also particularly about Aneen's role as DG Finance, having particular responsibility on Exco and on our board for that as well. It's about how each area, each team in the department oversees that. Then specifically, you asked about the hotline as well, and how we deal with people who raise concerns. We think the confidential hotline is a very good thing, but we need to rationalise the number of hotlines that we have in the Ministry of Defence. Very large, complex. Some of the hotlines do different things. It's not just about financial crime. We've also need people to report concerns about staff behaviour, just to give you another example as well. So we need to rationalise the number and the approach. We need that integrated investigative model that we've also talked about. There's more that we could say about that. We also need to look at our case management system as well. So this requires a systemic approach. Ultimately, it also does require leadership, it requires culture, and it requires, including in hearings like today, because this is also a way for this hearing will be seen by many people in the Ministry of Defence. It also requires me to be saying today, this matters. This is something that all leaders in my department should be taking seriously.
So well, just on that, perhaps you should start by getting your counter-fraud and the police teams to actually trust and work together. And that's your cultural problem. If people don't work together, nothing happens. So look, I think, Jeffrey, I've done my bit for now.
Well, I'd just like to build on that. I've got 2 or 3 questions, very brief, pithy questions, and then I'm going to take a break. So just on that question, it does seem to me that there are too many organisations involved. There must be a case for rationalising all of this into one police force who does the job professionally. So why do we need all different police forces? Why don't we just have one service police and rationalise the whole thing?
Mate, so first of all, there will be an element of constraint in relation to the criminal justice system where you receive the outcomes, whether it be service justice or whether it be criminal justice. So there will be a natural separation there between what the civilian police ourselves investigate and how we prosecute versus what the service justice. However, the work being undertaken at the moment by the Defence Police Secretariat supporting the Defence Police Board is looking at how to cohere better together the functionalities and the outputs of the service justice system. And myself, representing the MDP, colleagues from Fraud Defence are part of that conversation under a new governance structure. So I think that's the first point. The second point is, and it goes back to the point that another committee member made around the necessity for operational independence. So there is that sterile corridor between decision making so that an investigation cannot be unduly influenced so that we don't end up with a perverse outcome. I think that the next point is how we actually make sure that we are better coordinated with other policing. So we have got a watching eye on police reform and what's happening with that. I myself have had conversations with Gavin Stevens as chair of the MPCC, and we're engaged in watching how that works, and whatever function and format that takes in the future around investigation of fraud, we will make sure we are part of those conversations in the same way as we engage now with the Serious Fraud Office where necessary, or with the City of London Police as well. So certainly collaboration, regular engagement, but making sure that there is a structure that pulls all the levers across defence according to whether it be procurement, contract management, whether it be managing cultural change around recognising where risk and threat sits within defence, and the issues around loss of laptops and phones being not only a security risk but a financial risk as well. And that's where the cultural shift needs to take place.
So can I just, for a point of clarification, I can't remember whether it was you or whether it was Anine, referred to, and I refer you to paragraph 3.8, and this is the important issue that Sarah raised around the amount of prosecution. In that paragraph, it says, and Rupert also mentioned this, and this is also relating to Table 9 on page 34, of the 1,032 cases recorded by the confidential helpline, around 2% were criminal or service justice action. A further 18% were recorded as non-crime outcomes. And the others, which is about 80%, no action was taken at all. Now that does seem, I might be adding 2 and 2 together and making 5, but also taking into account your previous comment that you've got limited resources. It slightly suggests to me that there is a culture within your organisation that you will only investigate those cases which are absolutely clear-cut. That there might be other cases that could be and should be investigated but are not because you've got lack of resources. Am I making the wrong conclusion or not?
So I think, to be fair, Chair, first of all, when it comes to the tasking for the civilian investigative capability, and I only speak for the Ministry of Defence Police, is that we will be tasked through the hotline. So that triaging process, we get what we're fed from the hotline and then we respond appropriately, making sure that it's compliant with the National Recording Crime Standards, and we will carry out proportionate investigation. We do also look elsewhere, so we look into the security forms, we look into open source opportunities to seek opportunities around investigating economic crime. So could we do more through, if we had more referrals through the hotline? Yes, we could. So that hotline is complex. There are a number of hotlines, as Jeremy has mentioned. So getting visibility of all of that is a challenge because of the various size and structure and cultures within defence. There is more we can do. The key bit is the next model that we move towards around how we work better together means we'll get that information flow working better. And the key bit around building trust on what has been a tricky relationship in the past means a willingness to share more. And the key bit around this is timeliness, expediting some of these investigations so we can actually get ahead of the game, secure and preserve evidence better, and put a package together for CPS to prosecute.
I entirely agree with you. There's a challenge for me as a reader to work out how you had the cases referred to from the hotline, but that's for others to question after the break. So we will now take a break. The clock is at 11:06. If we could be back here sharply, if possible, just before 11:15, for the final run of this investigation. Can I thank you all very much? If we get sort of slightly cross, it's because we are frustrated. We want you to do more quicker, but you'll understand that. So if we could be back here at 11:15. Count down to broadcasting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Could I just start, Simon, with a point of clarification? And maybe I didn't ask my question very well just before the break, but I think you've now said twice that the level of prosecutions is 30%. But actually, as I said, paragraph 3.8 on page 33 and the table following it, figure 9, shows that it's about 80% are not prosecuted at all. So could we just clarify those figures? Could you look at those pages and table and clarify those figures for us?
My apologies, Chair. So the number I referred to earlier around the 38 was the detection rate of our investigation. So where we have prosecuted, the outcome for last year, 2025, was around 38%, and previous to that was about 31%. So that was just clarifying that as an outcome rate as opposed to the number of offences being investigated or prosecuted.
May I offer clarification, because I think I also used the 30% figure, and the 30% figure for the totality relates to where we are able to investigate, because we have allegations come into the fraud hotline which don't have sufficient information and may be anonymous, and we're not able to forward those for investigation. But where we can investigate, 30% have an outcome.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Clive Betts.
Yes, just follow one point about the hotline and whistleblower. What feedback do you give to people who've given you allegations, accusations to follow up? Do they get told what happens?
So we take safeguarding through our hotline process, incredibly important, as this committee would expect, and we were cited in a recent NAO report for the support that we give to whistleblowers that we are incredibly proud of. Whistleblowers are kept updated throughout the process with regards to outcomes, as the committee can appreciate. That will depend on what the outcomes are and what information we are able to share with the whistleblower. Or we would usually be able to share where processes have changed, but we would not share personal information that relates to individuals.
So you wouldn't share whether there'd been a prosecution?
I think it would be very case specific, and we would be abiding to the relevant laws and guidelines.
How you deal with this? Because I think there's always a challenge for people who consider whistleblowing, although not taking any notice of it. We'll just put it in and it'll disappear into a black hole somewhere, and we won't be kept updated about what happens.
So we certainly at the end of the process give the whistleblower an outcome letter. What is shared in detail will be case specific, but they will have the reassurance that the case has been investigated and when the case has been closed.
Every case?
In every case.
Okay. Right, just to move on. Said Permanent Secretary. You've come into the department new. You've got this report here, which is not happy reading for the most part. I think perhaps I would have wanted to hear from you something along the lines of, I've come into this department, I'm really quite surprised and upset by what I've found about the way fraud's I'm going to change it.
I think I've already expressed to the committee the seriousness with which I take the issue. I've already set out the importance that I'm attaching to us making improvements, making those changes. That's why I am very supportive, and that's why I'm very supportive and driving the work to have that revised counter-fraud strategy, which is the vehicle that I've talked about to drive the next stages of
What's
the
happening at present isn't good enough, is it?
There is more that we need.
No, it isn't good enough.
There is.
We just use language that is very clear rather than generalised.
There is definitely more that we need to do to make to get better at this. I'm going to use my words rather than your words,
okay,
Mr.
Betts.
I'm not. There is more that we need to do.
It's difficult to tackle this, isn't it? Unless you've got an accurate description of what the fraud actually amounts to. You haven't got a figure. You could come here today and say that's it.
Measuring fraud is really difficult.
I know it's difficult. You've not been able to do it, have you?
Can I? Do you want me to may I answer the question, Mr. Betts?
You can, yes.
We want to get a better estimate of our losses to fraud. The team are actively looking at what is the best, I'm going to say the word technology, that we can identify to help us get that best possible estimate. The fundamental challenge is, of course, where fraud is detected, it is easy. We know 2024-25 detected fraud and error 6.2 million. That is not the amount of fraud. I'm not saying that's the amount of fraud in the department, but it is the moment you're looking at something you actually haven't got direct evidence, it gets harder. We are going to look at what is the best technology for us, looking at what other departments and other organisations have done, like the NHS as well. It's still going to be very assumption dependent. It's easier where there's robust data or you can make comparative loss assessments. It's hardest to get a handle on levels of fraud when you've got to make an assessment essentially of what's described as the sort of the baseline vulnerability assessment. But we are going to do that because it's important in its own right. As I said earlier, I reckon that the key thing is it helps us identify the areas in the department where we will need to do more.
Right. So when are we going to get a robust and accurate estimate of fraud losses?
That's what we will set out in the strategy. I don't know if Anine wants to say anything else about that work.
Yes, so as Jeremy set out, it is absolutely a priority for us to improve our estimate. As part of that balance plan, as we talked about in the committee, the importance about both having a good estimate, about having the right controls in place to prevent fraud, how we're driving return on investment. So a balance plan to really drive value for the taxpayer, which I think is at the heart of what we are trying to do. We will, as Jeremy alluded to, we'll be working very closely with PSFA around what are the best methodologies to help us get after this. They did, the NEO reported back in 2023 that the MOD was forward-leaning in this space with our estimate, but we know we want to do more to mature it. We know it's going to be really critical. As Jeremy alludes to, learning from the NHS, who have been introducing both the methodology but also the practical advice about how you get after that. In the counter-fraud strategy, we'll be setting out how we expect to improve that. It's likely going to be in phases because it is complex, and we will start in the place where we think we have the most exposure to fraud, because that's where we think it's really important to have a more mature estimate. So we'll be using our risk register and understanding to really focus on this is where the estimate should be matured and what are the methodologies we can do to build out our confidence.
Right. Back to the question I asked. When will we have a robust estimate?
So for the whole of defence, it is going to be, I think, what we are seeing from the NHS, who are somewhere along this pathway. It is not going to be something that we are going to be able to quickly assure ourselves on a more detailed methodology across the whole of defence. But what we will be doing over the next year is really focusing in on the areas of highest risk and building out our estimate and our confidence in that estimate in that space.
You haven't got a date?
Well, the date will be set out in the counter-fraud strategy refresh, so we will set out the phases.
How far away is that?
So that's what we're writing now. We'll have that complete in September, and that will detail the phases of what we're going after.
You'll be able to give us a robust estimate.
September will set out a plan of the phased approach, and we'll be focusing in on the areas of the highest risk in the first case.
The answer to the question, though, what Mr. Betts is asking you very, very clearly, both of you, is when will we have a reliable estimate? Because I think this goes to the heart of the entire hearing. You've got a figure in here, somebody's assessed a figure of 1.5 billion of potential fraud. But I don't believe that the culture within the MOD actually believes that figure is accurate. So until you can come up with a robust figure that everybody believes that they're working towards, 1.5 billion you've estimated at, you're only recovering 6-point-something million, is a huge gap there. So please could you answer Mr. Betts' figure, either of you, I don't mind which of you, when will you have a robust estimate?
So what we have learnt from engaging with the NHS is that it is an incredibly complex and challenging thing to do, and we're taking lessons from them so that we are not starting from a low base, but can learn from what they've set out, is that it would be inaccurate and misleading for us to be able to say that there is a hard date at this point in time that we'll be able to say this is when we would be able to have redefined our estimate for the whole of defence. What we can assure you on is that it's really critical to us. We absolutely accept that a robust estimate drives the heart of how we understand the totality of the loss and where we want to direct our activities. And therefore, what we will be focusing on is the areas of highest risk. So by September, we'll be able to set out a plan for, in those areas of highest risk, exactly when we will be able to have a more mature estimate. But I don't think here today, recognising the complexity and the challenge, which we've learnt from organisations that are further along on this journey than us, that we are able to set out a specific date.
Surely, okay, so by September you'll start to break it down into the different areas. There's lots of different areas involved in this. But unless you have a robust figure that you're aiming at, how can all of your organisations start to work towards what they're supposed to be achieving? I'm beginning to lose the will to live here. I mean, this is a substantial amount of money. And if your organisations don't think the 1.5 billion is accurate, fine. But when will we have an accurate figure? You can add all the different sections up and come up with an overall figure that the MOD thinks that they are losing to fraud each year. Surely that's not impossible. But all we're asking for as a committee is when that is likely to appear before us.
So let me write to the committee to set out the work plan around that. I just want to. We're all aware of the 1.5 billion. It's set out in the report what that is, but you describe it as a broad estimate. I would say it's quite a theoretical number based on academic benchmarking of organisations that don't include the Ministry of Defence. But it is a sort of therefore quite a sort of conceptual estimate of the risk. None of this, though, takes away from the importance. It is a very difficult thing to get a robust estimate of fraud risk that is reliable.
You know where I'm coming from next. If you don't think it's the correct answer, you should give us the correct answer, because otherwise we can't assess what you're doing.
That's why I've already said it is a key part. When I earlier talked about the work that we have underway on our counter-fraud strategy refresh, it was the first thing I mentioned was the need to get a better estimate of fraud risk. So there is no difference between us on that, Sir Geoffrey. I recognise the value of that. Let me write to the committee to give you further details of how that work is, how it's structured, and what our estimated timetable would be. This is not through. I'm worried. I think the committee might think this is a sort of lack of will or a lack of effort. This is not. This is something that is a very hard thing to do, because we are trying to estimate something that we can't see.
No, I accept that. I do accept that. Unless you've got a reasonably reliable total estimate, all of your good people that are working for you in the Ministry of Defence, it's going to be much more difficult. And those figures at the moment are pretty stark. An estimate of 1.5 billion recovering 6 odd million is pretty.
Sorry, that's not. The 1.5 is essentially an academic construct. That number.
I suppose it's an academic construct. It makes you wonder what the department's been doing for the last few years if it's having to rely on an academic construct.
I think there's a previous NEO report as well that talks. This is something that all parts of government are working on, getting better technology. There are new tools and techniques to help us to do this, and actually analytics will also help us on this. So this is something that is a developing area of focus in government and further afield. It is not the case that
you know where we want you to get to. You will write to us and set it out very clearly. We'll obviously have a really good assessment of that, but we will want to have you back at some stage to account for how well you've done under that new process. So let us move on, Clive.
Just move on then to the risk areas and the assessment of risk. And again, there aren't any accurate assessments, are there, of the financial value of the various risks that you face?
On the risk registers, we are going through a programme, as I was alluding to earlier, to continue to mature how we set those out, both in how we nestle them in the organisation, so from the enterprise downwards, how we can continue to develop them as risk registers that can be actively used in the organisation. And as you rightly point out, that will include estimation around forward value.
And that will be available by September, will it?
So that's a programme of work, but that's happening now, and we expect that to be in place during this coming financial year.
If you develop a fraud strategy, how do you do it without any assessments of the various risks that are involved?
So the fraud strategy will be setting out how we will be responding to high risk, and then underneath that we'll be having a detailed plan of where we want to focus resources and activity. But the enterprise risk register has been developed and will be rolled out imminently. The risk registers that exist through our frontline commands and our enabling organisations are in place. So we're going through a programme now to ensure that we are able to include financial value so that we would then be looking at how we can use those to influence where we are investing, particularly in new technology and tools going forward.
If you don't know what the values are, you can't determine what the priorities are that you should be given to different areas, can you?
That's absolutely right.
So that will be available in September. I mean, it must be part of the strategy, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. That will be part of the strategy. I suppose what I'm conscious of is that it won't be a once and done programme. So what we have in place is an ongoing programme to ensure that those risk registers are constantly updated, that they are used, and that they are useful tools.
By September, as part of the strategy, you'll have some assessments of the value of the various risks.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Right, just go on to procurement and commercial risk, which obviously is a pretty serious matter and could involve very large sums of money. We just don't know at this stage. So how well are the commercial operations, the staff there, and the fraud part of the department linked together? Because in the end, the people at the front line doing the commercial operations should be the first ones to identify, shouldn't they, if there are problems?
So there are members of my commercial and industry organisation on the Defence Fraud Board, and clearly where we identify any issues or expected fraud, we would feed that in. I do think, just quickly replying to sort of the question around sort of clearer accountabilities for commercial. It picks up a bit of what Jeremy was talking about, defence reform, which is a key objective actually around simplification and clearer accountabilities. And under the National Armaments Director Group, you have a consolidation of procurement budgets and end-to-end ownership of the acquisition system, and also stronger functional leadership. So in terms of the ownership of the sort of budgets and people for finance and commercial, that's rationalised, and I think that helps with the visibility and driving improvements in this area.
Right. I mean, I was pretty shocked by paragraph 214 in the report. Our discussions with MOD officials working in counter-fraud and assurance suggest that MOD's commercial teams do not routinely consider supplier relationships from a counter-fraud perspective. For example, there are no clear criteria for commercial staff to refer commercial disputes where fraud may have occurred to fraud defence or the police. This is really quite shocking, isn't it? Because I think you can all see there's big money here which could be made by people wanting to fraud the system.
So I wouldn't recognise that characterisation.
Sorry, it's in the report. It's been agreed by the department.
I understand, but I am conscious that I don't think any of my commercial team were interviewed as part of the report, and I do know that we do look out for that, and I also know, because we have mandatory fraud and corruption training, that it is front of mind. And it's critical, clearly, particularly with the geopolitical context, that every pound is going to address sort of capability and warfighting readiness.
when we get reports in this committee, we assume the department has agreed them because they have. So it's no use saying that someone down there hasn't been talked to. The department at senior level has agreed this report, and it's agreed some very worrying comments about the lack of understanding of fraud in the commercial teams. Do you recognise that?
So I would agree, I suppose it's critical that my commercial organisation, the finance organisation and defence fraud work collaboratively and closely in terms of those reporting. So I would absolutely agree. with that.
Suggestion here is they aren't currently.
You made a statement, Jim, and I'm going to bring in the CNAG or his head of team, Joshua, here, that nobody interviewed anybody in your commercial teams. Could you just clarify?
The report's very clear. We're quoting MOD staff who have this view, and so it's precisely worded in the report, so I don't think there's any dispute about that. So this is a view from the assurance teams and the finance teams, observing the culture that they're working with.
And just to be clear, the assurance team there is includes cost advisory service, which is commercial staff, but commercial assurance, and counter fraud teams be fraud defence and other people working on counter fraud.
Look, the report is agreed. I'm not. Can I just it's just Jim's first hearing, so just the format. Constitutionally, the report is agreed with the department. The teams that Joshua has just referred to work for ANIM. Cost advisory service, fraud defence, incredibly important. So I want to offer just come back to some of my reflections, new into the job, taking this seriously, is that the first port of call is often to think about this commercially. It's to drive value for the taxpayer commercially. And that is where you've got this really class-leading cost assurance team that driving down on costs using the great advantages of single source contracting regulations because of essentially economic construct of the market. That's the route we have to go down. I also see really strong evidence of robust negotiation, commercial negotiation, strong controls in place. The difficult boundary is this commercial, how can I describe it as sharp practice? Got lots of excellent suppliers with very high reputations, work well in the department. It's that boundary between sharp practice and fraud and the intent that's involved in fraud. I have seen evidence that the department is focused on that boundary, preparing for this hearing. But I think there is more that we need to do in order to really build an understanding of that boundary. When has this crossed? When has this crossed? Because this is technical, complex stuff that issues that we are dealing with here. That's why it's great that everyone needs to do training, but we also need to balance that with real experts, fraud defence in the areas as well, to make sure that we're constantly looking at that. I don't know. Does that help?
Well,
does that help the committee?
It is helpful because, in this respect, you did say something there that I was about to ask you about training.
Yeah.
Do all the top people in DNS and everybody else who's got anything to do with procurement actually receive training so that they know what they're looking out for when they're procuring this equipment?
So all staff receive mandatory counter-fraud training, and then dependent on your role, you receive specific training. Exactly what level the training is rolled out to in DNS, I think we would have to follow up and write to the committee on. But that focus on the that common culture that we're trying to create in defence. So there's mandatory training for all staff, and that we have more specific bespoke training and ensure that people are accredited where they have counter-fraud roles in particular. Could I just come back to the point raised around, I think particularly the join up around the counter-fraud and commercial teams. We recognise what the NAA report has pulled out in that we would like to codify more of that relationship between us, and particularly ensure that the Counter Fraud team has visibility of activities across the enterprise. We see a real opportunity there, both by being able to report a more accurate figure of our activities, but also how we can do more to effectively drive outcomes. The commercial leakage tool that we introduced is a really powerful example of that. And what we've seen through that is it has been a stepping stone into that close relationship between the counter fraud and the commercial teams, and it's that we want to build on, codify in our ways of working, and set out those obligations. And one of the ways that we will be really strengthening the obligations through the counter fraud strategy is that clear holding to account through the functional route, so that we can set out clear, measurable KPIs that every area and every function in the department needs to report into.
One follow-up, slightly different issue. Relationships between suppliers and MOD staff. It's a suspicion sometimes relationships may get a bit close. Some people obviously get close personal relationships, and that's natural in business. Yes, if you want to. But sometimes there's a prospect, and indeed an actuality, that the MOD staff then move on, uniform staff and others, to work for the companies that they are having a commercial relationship with. How do you ensure that doesn't lead to fraud or, should we say, non-vigilant action by MOD staff?
So I'll start, maybe the Secretary wants to come in as well. Clearly we follow robust business appointment rules. So there are clear conditions put on staff in terms of both the timing and the type of relationship they can have with those suppliers. And also, as part of our procurement process, we have very clear conflict of interest declarations. One of the advantages, actually, and I was talking about some of the new technology we can see, that can do more sophisticated checking, checking of the wider kind of financial systems, ownership of companies, politically exposed persons. So that will help us make sure that's even better in terms of the declarations around that.
Quite a few of your staff will go on and work for the suppliers they're now dealing with as a customer.
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't personally think that's unhealthy. I mean, we recognise as a defence enterprise, particularly to meet some of the challenges, we need this sort of profound transformation of our system to deliver the Strategic Defence Review, to deliver Defence Industrial Strategy, and the skills that you might have working in the MOD can be valuable in the supply chain, or vice versa. What we need to make sure is they're not, that the rules around what they can influence in terms of procurements, the rules about how they can sort of lobby or sell into government are really robust and tracked through.
I just want to really emphasise, as Permanent Secretary, the importance I attach to proper, robust business appointments rules and the importance of policing those. That's something that I've always done and will continue to do in this role.
And that's how do you then control people going on to those private sector jobs with knowledge?
It's about following best practice, government practice and policy, and also employment law in this country today to make sure we have robust controls, conditions in place, and indeed periods where you debar people from taking on roles. Now, I've only been in the department a very small number of months yet, but I just want to reassure the committee that that's how I'll be approaching cases robustly.
In order to test that culture within the MOD Permanent Secretary, Andrew Finstein, and I accept you don't get this evidence in advance, tells us that Raytheon UK, whose parent company RTX recently faced significant legal sanctions in the US, including penalties of almost $1 billion. So this is a really well-known name in the defence industries. Would that sanction have been applied in the UK? Because that's the acid test. With the same evidence, prosecuted in the United States, would it have happened here in the United Kingdom?
I don't think I can answer that. I'm afraid on the very brief summary you've given me, I'm afraid it's too hard to hypothetically. What I will say is the Procurement Act 2023 gives us new powers actually, including powers to disbar suppliers from working with the department where they are found to have done wrong. So it gives us additional powers, additional protections, exactly how the legal process would treat companies. It's a bit hypothetical.
I accept
for
you
me.
You haven't seen the case. I accept that. It was the principle of the thing. Whether a well-known company like that, if you had the evidence, would you have the wherewithal and ability and wish to prosecute that company?
So I can answer sort of yes to that, and I think where we see underperformance from our suppliers, we will sort of terminate. Well, clearly, if it's a fraud, we'll rigorously pursue that. But where we see underperformance, we will. And that's a sort of breach of contract. Clearly, we'll terminate, and we will then seek seek costs. So we do robustly manage suppliers. One of the sort of opportunities, I think, actually, and it's linked to the work we've done under the Defence Industrial Strategy, is that we recognise as a commercial industry in the MOD, we need better understanding and illumination of the supply chain. Now, that is also about us being able to deliver effective capability and make sure we have the right shape of our supply chain. But it does contribute to some of the risks we're discussing as a committee, because a really good understanding for the MOD of who...
Okay, it was almost a yes or no answer, and you've answered it. Thank you very much. Sarah Green, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to move us on to triage and how the... allegations are triaged at the moment, because in paragraph 4.7 of the NAO report, at the end of paragraph 4.7, it states that different teams are not aware of the criteria or thresholds different parts of the MOD use when deciding to pursue or prioritise a case. So I'm keen to understand, and perhaps this is a question for you, Anine, correct me if I'm wrong, how you ensure that the MOD chooses the most proportionate way to investigate potential fraud cases, if there's not a common understanding across the MOD?
Thank you. I mean, there is a common understanding within the counter-fraud team of how those cases should be triaged. As you would expect, there's a standard operating set of procedures where they will look at the type of allegation raised, whether we think it meets or could be investigated for meeting a criminality route. Is the information sufficient? Is there more we can do to gather information before allocating? And of course, safeguarding, which is at the heart of the triage process. The heart of the triage is ensuring that the case goes to the right part of the Ministry of Defence. As I said at the start, the zero tolerance to fraud means that we review and investigate every case. Clearly, were the advice that and the police, Simon could talk a little bit more about the police process, but the advice and the support that we give to local areas when they're investigating includes a view of the materiality, which is why you see in our recoveries that we do have cases that have higher materiality level that form a significant part of our recovery, as that's where we will be focusing our activity, because there's often the strongest evidence and the greatest return on investment, and the importance of defence to recover that.
In paragraph 4.8, just to follow up on what you're saying, the NAO also report that they were told that if the police look at a potential fraud and decide not to pursue a case criminally, there's no clear mechanism for other parts of the MOD to continue looking at a case to see if non-criminal routes are appropriate. I was hoping you could speak to that and what the department's doing to address that.
Absolutely, and that comes back to the heart of the ways of working that we've discussed in this committee, and is absolutely critical to how we want to improve and continue to build out the mechanism that we have. I think Jeremy alluded to it earlier, but we will have an integrated investigative team that will ensure that as cases are closed by our police partners, that they can seamlessly come back into a counter-fraud to be triaged out into a local area where that is appropriate.
Is that not currently happening?
It does happen, but what we want to ensure that we have a really robust mechanism to ensure that it happens in every case.
Thank you, Chair.
Chair, may I just add to that? What's really critical to this as well is that whilst it may not meet the criminal threshold for investigation, that doesn't mean we don't record it as intelligence. And therefore we capture that and use that to build a more robust intelligence picture, and then we might start to see patterns of behaviour that fall behind that, and that then in the future may then lead to supporting the need for a criminal investigation.
Not lost information.
Correct.
Sorry for cutting across you.
So why do you do this on a local level? I mean, fraud is such a difficult thing to detect. Why didn't you have a specialist team at the centre that handles all fraud matters?
I think what we are very reflective of is that fraud allegations through the confidential hotline cover a huge range of potential allegations, and we want to ensure that we have a system that supports robust, effective and proportionate investigations that we can carry out. A large proportion of cases that come into the fraud hotline don't directly relate to fraudulent activities, and we ensure that we can triage those very often to our HR colleagues as well. So the heart of the system is making sure that the allegation is investigated at the right point of the organisation. What I would say, and that's why I was wanting to give assurance to the committee earlier, is we are very conscious that when we are allocating out to the local area, that local areas have the right skills and the right support to carry out an appropriate investigation, and that's both through formal training, accredited people based in the local area, and of course regular engagement through the counter-fraud team as well.
So, following from that, I am concerned about the role of fraud defence, because they are the people, as I understand it, that allocate out these cases from the hotline to Simon's organisation. They're composed of part-timers. I just wonder really whether they're doing a good enough job, and whether really actually Simon's organisation shouldn't handle the calls directly from the hotline, so that he and his professional colleagues can make an assessment of whether the cases should be taken further or not.
And that's why the embed that we introduced has had a really powerful effect. It ensures that we are joined up at the triage stage around any live police investigations, and as Simon alluded to, the intelligence that the police have covered, and also confirms that we are following the right triage allocation route.
Because the report reads as though it's sort of fraud defence can sit on these cases and they aren't necessarily progressed. So I would like to think that when a case comes into the fraud hotline, it is progressed one way or another. It's either progressed into taking action, hopefully a prosecution if the evidence is there, but it should be acted on quickly. And the report doesn't imply that.
The average triage time is 12 days. So that the team looks at it, triages and allocates out to the relevant part of the organisation, whether that's to police partners to a local area. So we absolutely monitor and track our triage time to ensure that we are not spending a lot of time on triage and we're getting the cases out so they can be investigated.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Rupert Lowe, please.
Thank you, Geoffrey. I think my question is to Simon. So I read again in the MOD report, and I'd just like some clarity on this, and it says the MOD told us fraud defence and the police have been working jointly on a new investigative model for fraud and economic crime, and this is the key word, which could include joining police and fraud defence case management systems. Is it going to, or is it still a possibility, which this sort of suggests.
So 2 points, if I may. The first point in relation to the development of joint working, which is much further than the embed in the hotline. This is being developed at the moment as a course of action which is broader than the MDP and fraud defence, which also includes the single service police, because they have an ownership of this responsibility as well. And that is being worked through at the moment as part of wider defence reform. But that's a very complex area because that's looking at the whole set of capabilities that sit within the service police and how you manage the level of investigation and ownership through two different criminal justice systems. Specific to the point that you make around the outcome and what that looks like as far as how you would then develop that through a case management system. Firstly, Fraud Defence are developing access to an alternative system, which Anine might be able to comment on. We ourselves in the Ministry of Defence Police are embarking on developing a new system that is broader than just case management. It also involves command and control, intelligence. That process is now, I believe, through a tendering process. There may be opportunities there for licensing opportunities for fraud defence to have access to that, but that will be very much governed by whether or not the access controls can be put in place around protection of police information as per the Information Commissioner's Officer under MOPI, under the necessary data protection law. So that's all being worked through at the moment, but the ambition is very much to see how we can dare to share, very much also through blended ways of working, which, again, having made the point earlier, means that we work to the sum of our parts, but recognising the independent skills and capabilities that are required.
I mean, I think that word should be should, not could, because it seems to me common sense. And I hear your answer, and I hear you talking about reasons why it's difficult for it to happen. I think you've got to overcome those problems, because this is fraud, this is dishonesty, and as I said, this needs to be dealt with. And I think, we've moved from basically a nation of shopkeepers, and as the private sector is taxed into oblivion and the public sector grows like a weed, you are going to see more fraud. The nation of shopkeepers used to keep their own accounts. The state's incapable of keeping its accounts. So I don't know, I've always had this theory, and I'd be interested to know what you think, that the state often builds up great big numbers of people who don't communicate, don't work together, they sit in silos, and they cost us, the taxpayer, a lot of money. I actually think if you put together a lightweight team, which is a combination of both police and the MOD, you use your whistleblowing line to effectively identify cases that need to be investigated. You can then work through those, investigate the ones you need to. But equally, if you decide you want to drop without any notice on a department, and you want to do a thorough audit of what they're doing and pull apart every single thing they're doing, if need be, listen to tape-recorded lines, listen, whatever you do. I don't know whether you tape-record lines. In financial services, everything was taped. You could go back and you could listen to messages, phone calls, every single detail, orders placed, the lot. Now, I don't know whether you do that. But if you have a genuine desire to look after the taxpayer, I think you do need to get this lightweight team, which will cost you a lot less than a vast group of people who don't talk to each other. And then you make people fear what happens when they're caught doing something wrong. And as I said earlier, people have to fear that when they get caught doing something wrong, they go to prison. Prison is not a comfortable place. So you've got to have some fear in there so that these people who are basically procuring large quantities of arms and munitions and other things, which are now so important to the country, if they're caught committing fraud, they get punished. And I don't know, I'd be interested to know, why can't you cut down this fixed cost base and set up a joint venture which actually attacks the issue?
I think just a couple of points there. The first is that I wholeheartedly agree there is an absolute moral, ethical, financial imperative to get to a point where we are reducing down the risk of fraud in the organisation for those reasons, but also from a security perspective as well. Secondly, how we do that, we've already embarked on that journey on looking at how we can work better together. The NAO report is helpful in the sense that it holds that mirror up to where some of the risks and vulnerabilities are. The assuring part is that we're already in train on delivering some of those capabilities, and bar the detail of how that work and how we coalesce together, which is still in development, very much the direction of travel is to do something where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, according to the individual capabilities of each part of the organisation.
Well, when you've sort of machinated long enough, Geoffrey, I think we need a report on exactly what. So is this could going to become a should? Are we going to be given all sorts of complex reasons why you can't make it a should? You know, 'cause I think the NAO's report, if I had a report like that on my department, I would be very worried, and I would actually be having all the drains up. So can we have a report on what, and you tell me it's still in flux, it's still not decided, it's still not done. We want action, not words.
Rupert, we will deliberate on all of the evidence
Yeah.
we've heard today. We will produce a report with recommendations, and I don't know, I can't preempt what's going to be in our report, but we will look at all these things.
Okay.
And if I may, the counter fraud strategy refresh, which will be in September, will absolutely set out how we're taking forward the joint investigative model, because you're quite right. We see that as the heart of how we effectively join up. We did review the structure between counter fraud and MDP to make sure that we thought it was still the most robust model, and what we concluded from that was it was, but we wanted to codify some of the governance arrangements, which again will be included in the strategy refresh that you will have sight of the summary of that.
I'd rather watch what the hands are saying than what the mouth is, what the hands are doing rather than the mouth is saying, actually. I mean, that's what we want to see, I think, as a committee. We want to see some action.
So, Anine, we've almost got to the end, you'll be glad to know, but back to Catherine's questions at the beginning, this 48p going to 134 for every pound spent in 24/5. I imagine a lot of that will have come from the two cases that I'm going to give you the details of, but not the names, although they may well be published. This is, again, in Accountancy Age evidence, so I think it is reliable, and the evidence will be published. Let me quote you the two cases and then ask you what your organisation is going to do to try and prevent these at an earlier stage. So in April 25, an ex-corporal, and I won't name him, was sentenced to prison for defrauding the MOD of £911,000, 677 pence through fraudulent expense claims submitted via internal online platform. As an aside, the court heard he retained over £550,000 for his own personal use, which I think says something about the court process. A separate case, an Army financial administrator was found to have stolen more than £300,000 by issuing cheques to himself while falsifying stubs to make them appear as payments to legitimate vendors. So I think the question is, these are very serious matters. What more can your system do to tighten it up? As exactly as Rupert says, if these people know they're going to be caught, they won't do it. So, I'm surprised that these weren't picked up, and I appreciate you haven't had time to investigate them. I do, absolutely. But in the generality, using the cases as an example, what more can your system do?
No, absolutely, and they are really serious cases, and we do take them very seriously. And I'll start by saying what we ensure we do as part of our process, certainly through the confidential hotline, but also more broadly through our financial governance, is where we identify that something has gone wrong. We look at our control framework and understand what were the controls that let us down. Was it that the controls weren't designed effectively, or were there a reason that they weren't operating effectively? And that's at the heart of what we do, not just the lessons learned, but then making sure that we are closing that gap. We're also thinking through how can we more systematically improve our control environment, both through the structures that we set up and through the opportunities offered by technology. Very, very briefly on both. So as part of the Defence Reform programme that the Secretary of State has set out, we are strengthening functional control. And that has a very real impact on finance, that we're bringing it into a more integrated, aligned structure sitting under me so that I can more formally hold to account, drive common standards and common processes. And that will have a real life impact on how we are going to operate. We are also looking at the opportunities that we can introduce through technological advances. There's two key elements I'd highlight to this committee. We have a corporate services modernisation programme that's covering finance, commercial and HR activities. That will move our systems onto the cloud. As part of that, as you would expect, we will be building more of our control tracks into the system that will enable them quickly, seamlessly, data-driven to automate the controls that currently, in a number of cases, we have to have manual checks on. They will be more efficient, they will be more effective. They will also free up my team's time to be able to intervene in areas of high risk where we see that more manual intervention might be required. Alongside that, we are also introducing data analytical tools that we've talked a bit about today that will allow us to interrogate expenses as a core example, looking for patterns of behaviour that will allow us to be able to prove intent and not just pick them up on a recovery basis.
So, I brought to you and therefore the public's attention where these are found. They should be well and truly publicised so that other people thinking of attempting the same thing will hopefully be deterred. That's really important. Permanent Secretary, I've got one question I was going to ask you at the top of the session. If you look at yesterday's debate on the defence estimates, there was a lot of dissatisfaction about the lateness of the Defence Investment Plan. A lot across all parties yesterday, so this is causing huge frustration, particularly here in this committee, that we can't examine whether your programme laid out in the Strategic Defence Review is realistic or not according to the budget that you're going to set. What is the problem? Why has it been so late?
First of all, I appreciate the interest in the Defence Investment Plan. It's incredibly important that we set out our plans to turn, it's essentially to the plan to turn the SDR into action. We are working very hard on the plan, and we intend to publish the plan as soon as we possibly can. Our ministers have been clear.
That doesn't mean anything. As soon as you possibly can means nothing.
Our ministers have been clear in Parliament. There are a lot of discussions underway to finalise the plan. It is a very significant exercise. It is the first time a government has taken a zero-based review of defence's budgets in 18 years. So it is a zero-based review is the key point there, looking at exactly not just our equipment programme, but at every budget line, including the support we offer to people and our wider infrastructure, to deliver a very significant transformation set out in the SDR, all at a time when demands on my department are rising, demands on defence are rising, and we've all seen that with action in the Middle East, Ukraine, activity in the High North that my Secretary of State is talking
We know
about.
all that. Appreciate that. We know you've got lots of demands on your time and the Ministry's time. The simple question was, what are the issues that are causing you so much difficulty at the moment? It was promised in the autumn. Here we are into the spring. I've no doubt if we're not careful it'll be the summer because you'll get into purdah because of the local government elections. What is the problem? Why is it being held up so much?
The reassurance I can give the committee is we're working as hard as we can to complete the plan. We need to make sure that the investment choices that the government is making in this very uncertain times are right for now and right for the future.
You see, no doubt what's happened in the Middle East this week will cause you to almost rewrite the thing. So if you keep on delaying, events will keep on happening. How are we ever going to get to an end state on this?
We're working as hard as we can.
Now, I've heard that twice.
To complete the plan. We will publish the plan as soon as we can. It is very important that we get this right in order to ensure that our military is ready to war fight as we've set out as the government's objective, and also to take account of the context that we are dealing with. You've referred to the events in the Middle East, also activity in Ukraine, potential coalition of the world, potentially having troops on the ground in Ukraine, activity in the High North. Demands are rising. We're working very, very hard on the plan, to ensure that the military have the support they need. It's important that we get this right.
Understand all that. Sounds as though you don't have enough money for what you need to do. But anyway, that's a different issue, and we'll find that out in due course. Can I thank all four of you very much indeed for coming today. We will look carefully at what you've told us or what you haven't told us. We will produce a report in due course with recommendations, which I hope you will examine carefully, and we'll see where we go after that. But I think, Permanent Secretary, as I indicated earlier, we'll look at your new refresh plan, which you say is going to come a little later in the year, very carefully, and I think we'll probably want to see you to see how you're progressing with that next year. So thank you again. Order.